let's test some Raft story myths. Hi friends, and welcome back to Raft. We're going to test some more popular Raft myths today, and all of these myths are centered around story islands. That means that this is going to be a spoiler-heavy episode, so I'd probably skip this for now if you want to avoid those spoilers. Nearly all of these myths were suggested by you all, so please continue to suggest whatever you'd like to see me test in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It would be much appreciated. But without further ado, let's start testing Raft story myths. Our first myth of the day comes from this Reddit post by user Dematis, asking if it's possible to land the bridge from Tangaroa on top of your raft. In case you weren't aware, the fifth story island involves launching the top part of this golf ball's tower to unlock the code for the next island. And the bridge seemingly launches in a random direction every time, but we want to know if we can get it to land directly on top of our little slice of home, and if so, what happens? To try and figure out what causes the bridge to go in a certain direction, I did a lot of testing over many launches, and came to the conclusion that the bridge will always launch in the opposite direction of where your raft's center is. For those unfamiliar with Raft's mechanics, Raft is a bit weird in the fact that the original 4 squares you spawn in on are actually the center of the world, and the raft itself never actually moves. Everything else moves around that, and it leads to some funky interactions, like having the trash stream be off-center. It also means that these 4 squares determine quite a lot of what happens in your world, including the Tangaroa bridge launch direction. Now that we know what direction the bridge is going to go, we can make that a constant in our little experiment. If we always park our original raft to the south of the golf ball, the bridge will always launch north. So now we get to see if we can land it on the raft. Obviously, the raft does not sail fast enough to intercept the bridge before it hits the water, since the direction is determined at the time of launch, and it takes about 5 seconds to hit the water on the other side of the island. So we need to be a bit more creative. Fortunately, one of the main aspects of raft gameplay is building up a raft, and there's nothing stopping us from just building all the way around the island to see if we can't intercept it that way. But I'm lazy and that takes time, so instead I'm going to build straight through Tangaroa with a couple of other known glitches. This doesn't affect the final result at all if we turn off motion sickness, and will help us guarantee that the final platform is directly in line with my original foundations. I built it about 20 squares out from Tangaroa on the other side just to give us some testing ground to work with, and then a decently large platform of foundations to give us the best possible chance of intercepting the bridge. With our little experiment set up, it's time for the moment of truth. I sent my alt account up to the bridge to enter the launch code, and put myself squarely in the middle of where I thought the bridge would land, just out of curiosity. And with a few magical buttons, the bridge is in the air and hurling straight towards me. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you ask, the bridge did hit me but didn't cause any damage, and it did intercept with the raft itself. This caused some weird collision glitches in which the raft violently shook in collision with the bridge, or it caused the bridge to shake depending on which perspective you were looking at, but everything inside the bridge was functioning completely normally. So technically, this myth is plausible. It is theoretically possible to land the bridge on top of your raft if you just so happen to build a platform large enough to have it be completely bisected by Tangaroa itself. It's just not very likely unless that's exactly what you're trying to do anyways. The 6th story location features a new character known only as the Grabber. This guy is somewhat insane and likes to steal items from anyone unfortunate enough to land at Varuna Point. Canonically, he steals from Bruno, Ruben, and Detto, as well as driving away the construction team that was working on building Varuna Point due to the constant unseen thefts. This myth suggests that the Grabber will definitely also steal from you too as you explore the towers. We're going to test this by starting out with an absolutely full inventory with a different stack of items in every slot, so if something does go missing, it should be pretty obvious. I'm also going to leave a completely full chest on my raft, parked right in between the 2 buildings, just so we know for certain if anything goes missing. Then I'm going to play through the island normally, and we'll see what happens. First up first, I'm going to run around and grab some light bulb while fending off the anglers. And it's a matter of swimming through hallways and avoiding some nasty booby traps until we make it to the Grabber's lair. Theoretically, if anything were to be stolen, I'd imagine it to be while I'm here, but so far so good. Next we continue down to the rhino shark fight, which is almost like a matador bullfight but with a few more explosions. And that takes us to the final part of the island where we can grab the crane key and send a large mass of rubble hurtling through the floor to open the last room with the temperance code. In total, this took me about 20 minutes, which should be ample time to notice at least a single change in my total items. In my inventory, everything is intact, so the Grabber isn't picking my pockets. After swimming back to my raft, the same thing is also true and all of the items are accounted for in their original quantities, which means that this myth of the Grabber stealing your stuff is busted. This myth comes from a comment over on TikTok under tip 40 of my season 1 of 101 raft tips, in which I discussed how to defeat all of Raft's boss enemies. This user stated that if you manage to attack the White Screecher boss from Caravan Town with fireworks, you won't be able to loot its corpse. So let's find out if that's true. Fireworks do technically have the highest damage of any weapon in the vanilla game, doing the same 20 damage that the titanium sword and arrows do, but with a major caveat. They can only damage seagulls and other players, which is where my doubts about this myth come from. Testing this is simple enough. We'll head to the 4th story location and attempt to take on Big Bird with a light show. After many attempts and many rocks to the head, I can firmly say that fireworks do not damage the White Screecher, and therefore it is impossible to loot its corpse after unaliving it this way, meaning the core myth has to be busted on pure unrelatedness. But let's assume that this commenter potentially meant murking the White Screecher with Dedo's experimental rocket on the northeastern part of the island. To test this, I first wanted to see if the explosion from Dedo's rocket did any damage to entities around it. After relaunching the same save many times to get an exact feel for where the rocket explodes, I put an alt player account near the explosion to see if it takes damage. It doesn't, no matter how close to the explosion I was. Just to be thorough, I also wanted to see if maybe it only works on the White Screecher itself, so I brought the alt account back in, built it a lovely little house so the Screecher would almost certainly be in the right place, and then I tried desperately to get the timing right so that the rocket exploded right as the Screecher was overhead to drop its boulder. I got pretty darn close, although it never exactly hit the Screecher. That didn't seem to matter as the Screecher didn't lose health either way. It's also worth noting that the original comment may have been referring to an earlier version of Raft in which maybe you could hit the White Screecher with fireworks. Sadly, there is no way to access any earlier versions of Raft other than the itch.io version from 2016, which is essentially a whole different game without Screechers entirely, so I cannot test if this was possible at some point in the past. Regardless, the core myth that fireworks make for an unlootable White Screecher is busted. You can't harm the White Screecher with fireworks, so they have no effect on the lootability of its corpse. At the very end of Raft's story, you face off against the most intimidating boss in the game, a large mutant hyena known as Alpha. Alpha is definitely Raft's most standard video game boss, with distinct attack phases, a long-winded precursor dialogue, and a nice, unique look unlike anything else in the world. And I'm not ashamed to admit this fight took me several tries in my first playthrough. You're supposed to take Alpha head-on in a small arena with no cover or recovery areas, so it makes sense that the devs would want players to have a decently high success rate of making it through this fight, which is where the idea that melee weapons don't have durability decay during this fight comes from. Generally speaking, tools in Raft have set durabilities that are decayed upon use, so a plastic hook can be thrown 40 times before breaking, or an axe can whack a tree 120 times before breaking. This number is dependent on the exact tool used, but we'll test this myth with every melee weapon in the game just to be thorough. The laundry list for all melee weapons in the game includes the wooden spear at 20 durability, the metal spear at 40 durability, the machete at 40 durability, and the titanium sword at 80 durability. For the sake of good science, each weapon will go to its own unique save with a completely fresh alpha fight. I'll only use one of each weapon to ensure that there is no confusion on durability decay, plus I have this handy mod that lets me see the item's exact durability. With our experiment set up, let's see what happens to our weapons arsenal against Alpha. Unsurprisingly, the wooden spear fight was the hardest as that weapon does the least damage, but this beefy toothpick ultimately survived the fight and came through with full durability. And that pattern held through for every fight with every melee weapon in the game. After the full fight duration with one singular weapon per fight, each weapon still had full durability after Alpha was defeated, after definitely taking more hits than the durability would have led you to believe. I was convinced this myth was fake, but to my surprise, the myth that melee weapons don't lose durability during the Alpha fight is confirmed. One of the best features added by Chapter 3 was the snowmobiles found on Temperance. These vehicles let you traverse a wide landscape with ease, and as a whole are pretty fun to play around with, but this myth suggests that just driving along the trodden trails may not be unlocking the full potential of these magical rides. Instead, this myth says that going around the perimeter of the island to drive on the icy surface can help you go even faster. Thankfully, this is simple to test, and I even have a little mod that tells me exactly how fast the player is moving at a given time. So let's start on the traditional footpaths marked by snow trails. Here, the player runs at about 2.8 meters per second when walking normally, or about 4.6 meters when sprinting. In case you're wondering, sprint jumping doesn't actually make you travel faster, it just adds the downward speed of jumping to the overall speed. On ice, you can run slightly faster at 3.5 meters per second, and sprint even faster at 4.8 meters per second. So running on ice is definitely faster than running on snow, but is the same true for the snowmobiles. On these, you move at a pace of roughly 20 meters per second, which is well above the running speed, so there's no doubt that these are the better transport method than running on the ice. However, driving on the ice is not worth it at the same 20 meters per second, which makes this myth busted. It is nice to know that running on the ice is faster though. And those are 5 Raft story myths that we have now thoroughly tested. If there are other myths you'd like to see me test, leave them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Raft Mythbusters. Feel free to leave a like if you did, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps me out. I hope to see you all again soon, but until then, have a great day.